Okay, so I recently got first place with this Metalfoe deck actually in the last ABC format library tournament. And well, during the tournament a bunch of illegal and misplays just happened. So today I do not really want to talk about the list. I more want to talk about a couple of interactions just to check out when you want to play in this format so you don't make these mistakes too. Okay, let's start in general with the rules, how pendulum monsters work and how pendulum summon works in general. Okay, so here we have a couple of pendulum monsters. You can see it because they have like this green part in the bottom part and have like these scale effects which show that they are pendulum monsters and not just regular monsters. So you can either just summon them normally as monsters, this is fine, or alternatively you can activate them as scales. So it's basically just as if you would place them there as continuous spells and traps in the extra monster zones. This got changed during later formats, but during this time it was these pendulum zones were still a thing. So while they are in these pendulum scales, their pendulum effect applies and not their actually monster effect. And then once per turn you can perform a pendulum summon. This is basically like a normal summon. Once per turn you can commit a normal summon, and once per turn you can commit a pendulum summon. And when you're doing the pendulum summon, then you can summon any number of monsters from your hand or face-up extra deck. This is usually pendulum monsters then, which levels is between the two levels of your scales. So you can see the eccentric has a scale of 7, and Gold Driver has a scale of 1, so you can summon any monsters whose level is between 1, 2, not 1, sorry, between 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and nothing higher and nothing lower. What I was saying that you can also summon monsters from the extra deck. This is a specific rule about pendulum monsters. When they are sent from the field to the graveyard, they actually go face up to your extra deck instead. On the flip side though, when they are sent from the hand to the graveyard or from the deck to the graveyard, then they are actually do go to the graveyard and not to the extra deck, and like if they are banished they still go to the extra deck, to the banished pile. So specifically when pendulum monsters are sent from the field to the graveyard, they go to the extra deck instead. Okay, so the next interaction is with Metalfoe Fusion. So Metalfoe Fusion has the effect that once you can fusion summon using monsters from your field or hand as fusion materials, and when it is in the graveyard you can shuffle it back and draw one card. So the relevant part is that only the shuffle back and drawing one card effect is once per turn, but you can actually use the fusion summon effect of Metalfoe Fusion as often as you like during your turn. So it can actually happen quite often that you use Metalfoe Fusion, recycle it, set it then again with one of your scales, and then use it again for another fusion summon. Okay, next let's talk about a couple of interactions about Alcahest. So Alcahest lets you steal monsters, and then you can use them as fusion materials. The important part is, 1, you can only use the effect during your opponent's turn, so you cannot use it during your own turn. The next thing is that Alcahest can only steal effect monsters. This means that you cannot steal normal monsters, like your opponent's Metalfoe monsters, and obviously a target, so you cannot steal Magus Spectres, because Magus Spectres cannot be targeted. This means that this card tends to be really bad in the mirror match. Another relevant part about the effect that you can use it as fusion materials. You cannot use a monster you equip with Alcahest and Alcahest at the same time for a fusion summon, because rulings. And another thing, which is kind of funny though it doesn't come up super often, there can be multiple monsters equipped to Alcahest. So if Alcahest survives the turn, then the next turn you can equip another monster, though usually you will just pop them with your scales. Okay, let's talk about a couple of interactions with Metalfoe. So Metalfoe lets you shuffle back 2 Metalfoe cards from the graveyard and then bounce a card on the field, which is once per turn, and then you can also summon a Metalfoe monster back when it goes to the graveyard. So the important part is that the bounce effect is hard once per turn, which people tend to forget, and there are different uses, so you can obviously either bounce something on your opponent's field, but you can also do other nasty stuff. So you can, for instance, bounce one of your own Metalfoes scales, reactivate it, and then set another spell trap. You can then also like destroy your own Mythilium and summon something back. Another really annoying thing is that you can bounce your own Vanity's Emptiness. So during your opponent's turn, you flip Vanity's Emptiness. If you have the Mythilium established already, then during your own turn, you just bounce the Emptiness back to your hand. During your own turn, you can Pendulum Summon, do stuff as much as you like, and when you set Vanity's Emptiness again, your opponent still cannot play. And another useful thing is that you can bounce your Full Metalfoe Fusion. Because when you bounce Full Metalfoe Fusion, set it with one of your scales, then it cannot be used during that turn, because quick play spells cannot be activated during the turn which they are set. But if you use Mythilium's effect, then you can actually use Full Metalfoe Fusion during your own turn, which comes up when you're going for OTK. So it's kind of common that like you make Mythilium, you have Full Metal Fusion set, you bounce it with Mythilium's effect back during your hand, attack with Mythilium, and then during the battle phase you activate Full Metalfoe Fusion, send Mythilium and something else, summon another fusion monster, and then Mythilium's effect triggers and summons another Metalfoe back, which just gives you more bodies during the battle phase and tends to lead to OTKs. And which is also important when we're talking about the effect to summon a Metalfoe back from extra deck or graveyard. That effect is not hard once per turn, and you have to summon back a Pendulum monster, please don't summon fusion monsters back. Okay, for the next interaction, we look at Argent Eccentric, which allows you to pop a spell or trap when it's in the scale and it destroys itself. So what's relevant is that you can destroy your own spells and traps, and the relevant part is that you can destroy Metalfoe combination. This happens if you have just a bunch of high scales, then you can use one of your Metalfoe effects, set your combination, then activate your Eccentric, destroy your own Metalfoe combination, then search a low scale. When we are talking about combination, so it has on the one hand the effect when it's sent to the graveyard, that it lets you search for Metalfoe. The other interesting effect is the effect to summon back Metalfoe from your graveyard if a fusion monster is fusion summoned. So the first thing to note is that you cannot summon back your Full Metalfoe Alcahest, because Alcahest has this clause that it must be fusion summoned. No other of the Metalfoe monsters have this effect, but yeah, Alcahest cannot be summoned back. The other thing, these continuous traps are kinda weird. So usually everything works fine, like if you go, okay, I activate Full Metalfoe Fusion for instance, just make a fusion summon and then activate the combination as Channeling Bomb, then combination resolves fully, and then you summon your fusion monster, and after the fusion summon happened, you can summon back a monster with a lower level. What also works is that you just use Full Metal Fusion as Channeling 1, you fusion summon your fusion monster, and then in a new chain you activate Metalfoe combination, and then you're activating it with the effect to summon back at the same time, and then you can still summon something back. But what actually does not work is when you activate Full Metalfoe Fusion as Chain Link 1, and then in a higher chain link activate the Full Metalfoe Fusion. Then basically the fusion summon happens first, the combination resolves at a later point, and it basically could not correctly see that the fusion summon happened, and it cannot activate its effect, which is kind of weird, as if you would have flipped the Metalfoe combination in a new chain, you actually would be able to summon back, but it just is what it is. Another thing just in general, which is something which is kind of useful, is that oftentimes you like make your Mythilium and then during your opponent's turn use the Full Metalfoe Fusion with combination together, summon the Orichalc, and then you're able to summon back the Mythilium with the combination, and then the Mythilium triggers and summons Metalfoe back. And this just gives you a bunch of bodies, because when this Mythilium, which is summoned back, is destroyed again, then it summons another monster back. When Orichalc is destroyed, you get to destroy a card on the field and so on. And that's just something you kind of often do. It does not provide any disruptions, but it just tends to be a lot of bodies, which are hard to get through. Okay, let's talk a bit about Orichalc, because Orichalc has this interesting effect that Metalfoe monsters deal double piercing damage when they attack a monster in defense position, and this leads that you can like oftentimes just like deal absurd amounts of damage to stuff which is placed in defense. So Paleozoics have to be, for instance, careful to not place all of them in defense when they don't have like Verboka or something. And also in the mirror match, this can be kind of dangerous. Another thing you can do is that you actually make Auricalc during your own turn, and then use Full Metalfoe Fusion during your opponent's turn, which allows you to get a pop during your opponent's turn. Then you can, for instance, make an Alcahest and also steal another monster. This is something you rarely do not do because this is just a bunch of resources for like more disruptions, but in certain spots this can be kind of useful. Okay, next let's talk about the Clifford engine. So the Clifford engine is 1 Scout, 1 Monolith, pay 8, and you get to search the Monolith, then you can pop the Scout, Pendulum Summon both, make Nova, make Infinity, which is a negate, which is cool. Things to notice about these cards is that Cliffords lock you into only being able to summon Cliffords while they are in the scale. So this can always be kind of dangerous if you just activate them in the scale and cannot get rid of them, because this also prevents you not just from pendulum summoning, but also like using your fusion monsters and so on. And another useful tip with Infinity, in certain spots it can be actually useful to activate your Full Metalfoe Fusion and then negate your own Metalfoe Fusion with Cyber Dragon Infinity, just to be able to draw a card if you don't want to make a fusion monster right now with your current board state. You just want to get a draw instead. Okay, let's talk a bit about Metalfoe Counter. On the one hand, Metalfoe Counter summons a monster when something is destroyed, and you can also banish it and add a Metalfoe from your extra deck back. So the cool thing about a card being destroyed is that you can trigger it on your own with like your own scales and so on, or just like crashing something. And this card has also application against Paleo. So on the one hand, you can use this card during the damage step, when you crash a monster into an opponent's monster, and then your opponent cannot chain a Paleo during the damage step to this card. And another cool thing is that you can banish it from the graveyard when your opponent activates a trap, and then by chaining it, your opponent is not able to bring back a Paleo. On the same level, you can also use Full Metalfoe Fusion in response to a trap to prevent your opponent from bringing back a Paleo monster. But you can also like use the graveyard effect of counter in different ways. So you can just keep it, for instance, to make sure that you can always add back a low or high scale to make sure that you can actually pendulum summon. And another cool thing you can do is like use Mithrillium's effect, target counter and another Metalfoe card, and then chain the Metalfoe counter, get the add back, and then your Mithrillium only shuffles one back. And thereby, if you don't have that many targets of Metalfoes, you can thereby just like still use the counter effect and use Mithrillium's effect at the same time. Okay. Other interactions with Rare Metalfoe Bismarck here, it lets you search when destroyed, which also counts when it is destroyed in the pendulum zone. The thing is, though, that you have to declare Bismarck here instantly when it is destroyed, when that happens, even though you get the add during the end of the turn. So this can be important if your opponent like tries to shark you or something like that. You specifically have to declare Bismarck here when it is destroyed, not during the end phase. During the end phase, the effect quote-unquote just happens. And another interaction is with the Magic Spectres, because they cannot be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card's effects. And this can be relevant especially with Paleo, like when your opponent is trying to use like a Canadia, targeting one of your Bunbukus or your Kiwins. That kind of stuff does not work. But you yourself can do that stuff, so you can still pop your Bunbuku with your own pendulum scales and so on.